Alright, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to give you a breakdown of how fileless malware works. I'm going to go through how you can get infected with this stuff, how this stuff works on the back end, and I'm also going to show you an example, a quick down and dirty thing like writing out a PowerShell script, like how someone could get infected with this stuff, and also why it is so nasty. So I've got a lot of stuff to cover on this little slide that I made here, so we will go ahead and jump right into it. So there's quite a few ways that you can get hit with this stuff. And so when it comes to email, one of the things that you'll see a lot is phishing. They like the threat actor will try to get someone to download an infected zip. Usually what they'll do is put a password on it. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, if you put a password on a zip file, basically it encrypts it, and so antivirus can't scan it ahead of time. And what a lot of people will do is they'll go ahead and, oh, okay, well, I'll put in the password. And then they'll click on a file and then it infects that person's computer. So if someone ever gives you a file, or like if you see a file on just sitting on the internet somewhere and there's a password on the archive, you've got to be really careful about that. What you could do is just go ahead and unzip the contents, but make sure to scan them ahead of time. The other thing that you'll see with this is a lot of the hackers will put a bunch of junk data in an executable because a lot of people are finally catching on that you can use things like VirusTotal. And so what they'll do is they fill it full of junk data. So VirusTotal will only allow you to upload a 650 megabyte file to scan it. And so what they'll do is they'll have their lines of code in there. So the file would only end up being like maybe 1 megabyte at most. But then they'll fill it up with a bunch of junk data. So VirusTotal can't actually scan it. And then the person's like, oh, okay, well, I'll just go ahead and run it. But it's like if you ever get like a PDF or text file or something like that, or just even an executable and it's like 650, 700 megabytes, that's going to be a huge red flag for you. And an example of this being used in real life, I was watching a YouTube channel. I can't remember the name of the channel off the top of my head, but they got an email saying, hey, we've watched your channel. We like your content. We'd like to sponsor your channel. Here's a zip file with stuff to review to see if this is something you're interested in. It might have been Leo over at the PC Security channel, if I remember correctly. And so Leo went to scan the file because he thought it was odd that it was such a large size, and sure enough, it was someone that was trying to basically take over. It was going to load credential stealers, so they would have been able to take over his channel and hack it. And so it was if you go watch a video, I don't remember what it's called, it was a very cleverly written email that would trick pretty much anyone that was reading it, because it was written just like the person was familiar with Leo's content and then said, hey, we're familiar with your channel, we've watched these videos, here's our terms if you want to read, if you want to accept this sponsorship. So that's stuff you have to be really careful of. The other thing here that you have to watch out for a lot is links. They will end up sending you to an infected website. And so let's cover websites real quick because this is a pretty common one. So there's a few different ways that this ends up being an issue here. Malvertising is a pretty common one. It seems like every few months at this point, I'm reading about Google ads or something like that, where there was viruses being spread through ads. There was one, I think it was about a year ago, where people would go to Google and type in, they would search for software like OBS, and there were malicious ads where people would think, oh, okay, this is where I download OBS, but they're actually downloading viruses. So malvertising is kind of a big issue. The other issue that comes up with malvertising is you can also get infected with viruses when ads load on a website if they are malicious ads. It's why I recommend you just block ads. You get like a good ad blocker like uBlock Origin, which is really good, because ads are just running the internet in general. There's no way in hell I could put up with the internet if it was just riddled with ads and had to put up with that crap all the time. The other thing that's becoming a pretty common issue these days for people getting infected is drive-by downloads. Now, with a drive-by download, all you have to do is visit a website, and it can basically infect your computer. You don't have to click on anything or do anything. And if you're really unlucky, your antivirus will never even catch it, and then you've got an infection without you even knowing about it. And then the other thing is scripts. So this can be something like JavaScript. There's a really popular browser add-on out there called NoScript. The thing is, like, if you block all scripts, you're gonna break like just about every website. Like, there's so much stuff that won't work properly if you block scripts. The problem is that they are really easy to use to spread malware with. And then the other thing is macro. So I don't know if anyone's watched my video talking about Windows hardening, the Windows hardening guide, where I talk about configure Defender, but there's options in there where you can block macros, and macros allow you to do a lot of stuff, basically like automate a lot of tasks, make the documents easier to work with. So what you see it typically is like on Adobe PDFs or like Microsoft Office, you'll see macros. The thing is that those are also a common threat vector. The other thing is threat actors will also they'll send out emails saying, oh yeah, here's a document. And it might look like a completely harmless document, but then you open it, it executes a macro, and then it infects your computer. So then we come down to these are the three common ways that you'll end up getting an infection with fileless malware, and I'll cover each one of these in depth. So first you have process hollowing, and then atom bombing, and then what's called living off the land binaries, or lolbin. I will cover each of these briefly so you get an idea of how these work. So when it comes to process hollowing, what you'll end up seeing, and I just wrote SVC host here as an example. There you could get basically have just about any process get hollowed out. This is just an example. So this is where you would have a process on the computer get suspended. And then what the malware will do is it will go modify the contents that are stored in the RAM. It will put its malicious code in there, and then it will start the process back up, and now you have actively running malware on your computer. Another thing that you will end up seeing is atom bombing. Now, Windows has something called an atom table, and what you can do with these is you can either force or trick the operating system to inject malicious code into a specific process using the atom table. And then living off the land binaries. Typically, what you'll see here is either malicious PowerShell scripts do this, or you can also have malicious DLLs ran, or you could have a malicious PowerShell script download a malicious DLL as well. So here is an example of something that, now this is a really simplified PowerShell script here, and I will just briefly explain what's going on with this here so you kind of have an idea of how this works. And so this is really how easy it is to infect someone's computer if you're using a PowerShell script. Now these can get somewhat complicated. Like I said, this is very simplified. So invoke expression means that this is a PowerShell command that's going to be ran. And then command here just means that there's going to be a command coming up. Certutil is what Windows uses to manage certificates. So like certificates are pretty important. So like you have things like SSL certificates. You have like certificate authorities that would say, oh yeah, this is a legitimate piece of software. It handles things like revoked certifications being revoked. So this is a common way for hackers to be able to infect computers if you're going to use something like a PowerShell script, because certutil also allows using URLs. Now URL cache, this just specifies that a URL is being used. Split, typically if you see this used, what it means is that it's splitting the file up into multiple chunks. That way an antivirus can't just rely on using signature-based detection to be able to pick up on the file right away, so it'll break it up into smaller chunks. And then F means that it will overwrite any files that are already there. So let's say something is already, so we'll come back to that here in just a second. Now then you have your URL here to the malicious server. I've got some other stuff down here that I'll cover in a second. And then you have the file that is being downloaded and where it is being sent to. So let me give you some examples here. So let's say we've got this malicious server that this PowerShell script is calling home to, and then it's coming in to take over, download a virus. Now, I know I said this was fileless malware. This is just an example of things that can happen. So typically what you would see with this is something like a malicious registry key. And that's the other, so it could, typically what you end up seeing here is just like I said, something like a registry key. I'm just keeping it really simple here by using this virus text. So what could happen here is that this PowerShell script calls home, downloads this virus, and then let's say, for example, they take an svc host.exe, let's say they replace an exe inside of system 32. And it could be a completely legitimate file, but then they just override it with some malicious code or add some malicious code on top of it. So you could do that with an executable. You could do it with a DLL. Like I said, typically what you'll see with stuff like this is like a registry key being used, or you can also use something like WMI, which is Windows Management Instrumentation. So then every time the computer started up, and I'll cover this more here in just a second, but basically every time the computer started up, like let's say the computer records an event like, oh, a user is logged on to the computer's been booted up, user's logged on. Okay, execute this registry or go to this registry key, execute this PowerShell script, and then you have malware running in the background hooked into, let's say, for example, a legitimate process to make it a lot more difficult to be able to find. Now, I did also notate here HTTPS, so I want to cover a couple of other things here real quick, and then we'll come over here to the computer being infected because there's some more points I'm going to cover. So on this HTTPS, for example, typically what you'll see here is this right here as opposed to just regular HTTP, because anytime, and this factors in more so on if someone's trying to infect a corporate network or a government network as opposed to a home network, because hackers will know, okay, well, they're going to have deep packet inspection running. They're either going to have IPS, intrusion prevention system, or IDS, intrusion detection system. And so if you have deep packet inspection enabled and IPS is doing its job and all that kind of stuff, if you're running everything through HTTP, it will be able to inspect that traffic ahead of time and say, okay, something's wrong here, and then block it. Now, hopefully on a corporate or government machine, they will be able to scan HTTPS traffic as well. Some DPI is not capable of doing that. But like on a home machine, your antivirus, your firewall, whatever, is most likely not going to be able to decrypt this HTTPS traffic. So that's one thing that can be an issue, and that's also, like I said, why I wanted to cover that. The other thing I'm also going to cover real quick, this isn't all that common anymore because a lot of content distributor networks are moving away from this, but there's something called domain fronting. Now, an example of a content distribution network would be somebody like Cloudflare, Amazon, Google. A lot of these services are moving away from being able to use domain fronting because domain fronting, you can use this as a way to distribute malware. And by the way, if you are going to use domain fronting and this PowerShell script, there would have to be quite a bit more lines of, or there would have to be more code to this. But what domain fronting is, this is something that could potentially be used, is it looks, what's happening here is it looks like you have reputable or traffic going to a reputable domain. And so that reputable domain is called your front domain. And then it's resolved using DNS, so it establishes an encrypted connection to the server. And then you have an HTTP host header, which is calling home to a different domain, which is called your backend domain. Now, because the encryption or because the connection is encrypted, it means that like a firewall or router can't actually see where that HTTP host header is being phoning home to. Then once that connection is established, then the backend domain, which is basically like the malicious server, is able to send traffic to the computer, but it looks like that traffic is coming from the legit domain here. So that's just a very brief example. This stuff is super in depth, and I'm trying not to get too far into the weeds here. It's a very basic explanation of how things like domain fronting and how things like process hollowing and atom bombing work. I could seriously just make an entire video talking about this stuff all on its own. I'm trying to keep the video from going on too long here. Now, like I said, typically a lot of times what you'll see here is something like a registry key being added, or like an event will trigger. So like I said, a user logs on to Windows, for example, and then the event happens. It says, okay, the computer's up and going now. Let's go ahead and run this script here. And then you have malicious code being inserted into the RAM. And what this ultimately leads to is you'll have things like ransomware, and if it's fileless malware and it's not caught, these people can go and steal a lot of your info. They wouldn't even have to run ransomware. What they could do, like on a home computer, for example, and if they're, the other thing that could end up happening is like on a corporate network, they're probably going to run ransomware because the security team's going to end up noticing them at some point, is they could just steal stuff from you in the background. So on a home user's computer, for example, is they could just go and siphon out like all of your banking credentials and stuff like that. and then you notice money going disappearing and all that, and you don't ever know what it is. And then if you're really unlucky, what happens is you end up with network infiltration. So what they're able to do is once they've infected one device on your network, then they can go and infect other devices. There's a video that I watched a while back. The YouTuber's name is basically Homeless. He made a few different videos that are pretty funny. One of them was titled like 100 viruses versus PC, and then like 1,000 viruses versus PC. They were pretty good videos. I'd recommend go watching them. I thought they were pretty funny. But then he mentioned in one of his videos that he didn't know by installing viruses on his computer that it was able to take over and infect other stuff. And then he was noticing weird activity on his other computers. And so let's say you could have good antivirus on your other computers, it could be completely clean. But if one gets taken over, what can happen is that can spread to other computers on the network. And so you're probably wondering, okay, well, what can I do to protect myself against this stuff? Because if it runs in the background, I can't ever detect it, anything like that. How am I supposed to defend against this? Well, it's not like the biggest deal in the world. Like good antivirus should be able to catch odd stuff happening in the background, like odd internet traffic. Hopefully your firewall's working like it's supposed to, and you've got a computer that has heuristics running and things like that. This is one of the reasons why I think it's ridiculous that people run without antivirus on like a Windows computer. You can maybe get away with that on Linux depending on how you have things set up, but definitely not on a Windows machine. And so it also means things like having good antivirus, keeping your system up to date, making sure that all the 0 days are getting patched, or making sure that all the other vulnerabilities are getting patched. You guys won't be able to find this comment. I had some moron about a week ago come on my channel. The guy went on to one of my videos and called me stupid and said, "Oh, I've been running Windows XP for years now, and I run it on multiple machines, and I run businesses off of it, and I've never been infected." And the guy was like looking, I guess he was looking to cause problems. And normally, what I would do is just pin the person's comment and insult them back and make them sound stupid because that's what this guy did. But it would hurt my channel analytics, and I'm not willing to hurt my channel just to put someone in their place. But I did think it was kind of funny. It's like, this is the kind of person that's like, oh, well, I run an antivirus and therefore I'm a master of how computer security works. And it's like, when I read the comment, it's like, well, this is how you can tell like people that actually have worked in IT versus people that just do this stuff at home. Is once you start dealing with stuff like this, you realize how much of an issue this stuff can really be and how much damage it can cause. And so that's the other thing, is you just make sure you keep your computer up to date. If you keep your computer up to date and you're running a good antivirus, good firewall, all that kind of stuff, I wouldn't really worry about this too much. The other thing, and because like I was mentioning about things like websites, for example, is make sure you're running a good ad blocker. So uBlock Origin is a really good one. I mean, like I said, the ads these days are running the internet. It's just, it sucks going and experiencing the internet, and you have ads popping up on YouTube. You got them popping up on websites. They're annoying AF. It just ruins the experience. So if you run a good ad block between ad block, antivirus, firewall, don't be clicking into dodgy websites or doing it super goofy with your computer. And I don't, the chances of you being targeted as a user would be super rare unless it was just some random phishing campaign that you ended up clicking on that was sent to like 1,000 other people. But I mean, this isn't really a thing that the home user typically needs to worry about. Where this becomes an issue is like if you're visiting like random odd websites, like file repositories or something that I tell people they should just stay away from. If you need to get like a piece of software or something, it's best to just go directly to the developer's website themselves to download it. But there's typically not a lot of ways home users can get infected by this stuff. Where it becomes kind of a bigger issue is in things like corporate environments, where there's much more incentive for these people to be able to go and make these kind of attacks against people's devices. Anyway, that's going to wrap the video up. I hope it wasn't super technical. I try to keep this stuff from like being way too overwhelming and just explain it in more of a simple way. Trying to find like a happy medium there. I think I'm slowly getting there. This is being quite a process to figure out how I can explain stuff but not get too in depth. The thing is, like, if I was making like a security plus or something like that to help someone pass their CompTIA, then I would cover this in way more in depth to like properly explain this. But this is more of like, okay, here's how fileless malware works. Here's what you can do to protect against it, kind of thing. I don't want to get too far into the weeds. Anyway, if you like the video, go ahead and I just drop a comment. Let me know. If there's anything in particular you want to see, also just go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know. I've got a whole bunch of stuff coming out. I'm going to be working on more networking stuff like networking security, but also networking stuff in general, like IP subnetting. I'm going to be covering things like IPS and IDS. I'm going to, at some point, make videos covering how to use Wireshark and read network activity logs, all that kind of stuff. Tons of stuff coming up. But anyway, if you want to see anything particular, just let me know. If you have any questions about how this stuff works, if something didn't quite make sense with you, just go ahead and drop a comment, let me know, and I'll try to explain it, clarify whatever it is that, because I probably didn't cover everything as well as I could have, but like I said, I'm just trying to find that happy medium. Anyway, thanks for watching, and with that being said, I will see you on Friday.